So according to James, in his opening verses of this second chapter, members of the early church struggled with the sin of discrimination. Now, we're not talking the Ku Klux Klan type of discrimination, where they were barring certain kinds of people from their congregations. It actually was a more subtle prejudice. Verses 1 to 4 states this quite clearly. If an obviously wealthy person attended a service, the members would fawn over that individual and direct him to a seat of honour. Someone would perhaps run and get him a coffee, while another introduced him to the pastor. There would be smiles all round. But if a homeless person walked through their doors, there would be a moment of inaction, as members would glance at each other to see who was going to dispatch the interloper. It sounds in one sense like prejudice and discrimination, or I think we could even use the words favourites or favouritism. And we might be sitting there going, no wonder James wrote this book if that's what they were doing in differentiating. But can I tell you, and I actually hate to say this, but I've had that happen to me. I've been on holidays, not in my uniform, didn't pack my uniform because I pack enough anyway, but you know. But I went to the Salvos. I'm not going to say which state, I'm not going to say where or anything. And we walked in. We stood there for a while, everyone's intermingling and everything. Everyone started to go to their seats. Okay, we'll take our seat. We took our seat. Nobody still came up and spoke to us or anything. Ignored us. And then as we were walking out the door, we stopped deliberately to shake hands with the Salvation Army officer. And, hello, how are you? Are you visiting? Or, yeah, we're visiting, we're on holidays. Oh, where from? Da-da-da. And it sort of came out, do you attend the Salvation Army? Well, actually, yes, we do. We're actually Salvation Army officers. Well, I might have been Queen Elizabeth by that stage, because suddenly I was the most popular person in that congregation. So we look at James and we look at those verses and we sort of cringe, don't we? A little bit. But I hate to say it, it happens. So let's just look at the two words that I mentioned before, favourites and favouritism. We all have favourites, don't we? Favourite colour, we have favourite foods, favourite places to eat at, etc. Favourite is something that is preferred over other things of the same kind. Now, favouritism is the practice of giving unfair preferential treatments to one person or group at the expense of another. You see, when we show partiality towards something not based on merit, but based on some external factor, it is favouritism. And how often we see this? Usually we find this often has to do with appearance. For instance, did you know it has been scientifically proven that it is natural human nature to gravitate towards people who are more attractive? It's been proven. One Dutch study found that in 300 Dutch advertising agencies, the firms with better-looking executives had higher revenues. A Harvard study found that when they put makeup on a woman, it increases people's perceptions of that person's competence, likability, attractiveness, and trustworthiness. Makeup, that's all. Well, I can tell you then I bomb out on all those characters because it's very, very, very rare that I wear makeup. So I'm obviously very incompetent, I'm not likeable, I'm very unattractive, and I'm not trustworthy, according to that study. What was that? I heard a comment over in the corner there. But seriously, there are many factors in appearance that we use to make trivial observations, aren't there? We judge people on skin colour, on gender, on race, attractiveness, the quality of the clothes, and I could go on and on and on. But you know what? James calls it out. Giving someone preferential treatment because of the way they look or any other trivial reason, what does he say? Has no place in the church. In fact, no place in the kingdom of God. People who appear wealthy and successful are generally considered to be more trustworthy. For example, I guess, why is it whenever you go for a job interview, you dress up? We do, don't we? You don't wear your trackies, you dress up and make yourself, buy your clothes appear very professional and knowledgeable, don't you? Because you see, if you appear wealthy and successful in our society, it is a human nature to believe that you are wealthful and successful. And of course, I guess in some sense there is a grain of truth in there. Have you heard the saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person? The logic that goes, if someone is capable and achieving lots of things, they are obviously good at getting things done, so ask them. The same sort of logic applied to the people James was writing to. If someone is good at becoming wealthy, they must be a great person. So you want them in your meetings and in your church. Well, James says, when you do this, when you give preferential treatment, when you show favouritism, even in the very smallest way, verse 4 says, have you not discriminated within yourself and become a judge with evil thoughts? It is worth to note that James uses the word discrimination here. You see, you can't show favouritism without showing discrimination. Favouritism is the opposite side of the same coin as discrimination. Now, James is quick to point out also that being wealthy has nothing to do with being a good person. In fact, he points out that often people can become wealthy by evil means. People can climb the corporate ladder by stepping heavily on the people below them. Wealthy people in James's day could sue people in court, and the poor people could not afford proper representation and would lose. I think we see that occurring a lot even today, don't we? Instead of showing favouritism or discrimination, follow the royal law. The royal law, verse 8 says, which is love your neighbour as yourself. Because when you show favouritism, you are breaking this law. The fact that we treat people with makeup on with more respect, the fact that we give greater weight to someone dressed up in a job interview, the fact that companies with more attractive executives are more successful shows that there is a deep and fundamental flaw in human nature. James says it's sinful. Jesus tried to explain this when in Matthew 5, verses 21 to 22, he says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." James is saying favouritism may not seem as bad to us as abusing the poor, but it is. Just like calling someone a fool doesn't seem to be as bad as murder. In the eyes of God, it is all evidence of a disconnect with him. To break one of God's commands is to break them all. If I come upon an electric fence, for example, it will be foolish of me to think that it will only shock me once, even if I stood there and touched it 10 times in 10 different places. No, you see, that fence will shock me the first time I touch it, even if I brush against it accidentally, and it will keep on. Likewise, it doesn't matter whether I break one of God's commands by accident or I smash all of them on purpose. I am a lawbreaker, deserving of God's eternal judgment. So basically, James is saying, don't discriminate. It is a sin that God takes seriously, and so should we. Did you know the symbol used for justice by the courts is a woman who is blindfolded holding scales in her hands? Can you picture that? Some of you might be able to picture that. And we use this symbol to say that justice is blind. And the idea behind it is that if you cannot see the two individuals, then you treat them the same. Now, I remember I got called up for jury duty many, many years ago. And what did I do? I dressed up. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? And I remember I got called into court. I managed to get into a court. And once you're in court, you become a number. And they'll call out your number, and then you've got this bit of a long walk to go from where they sit you to the actual jury box. And on that little walk, the prosecutor or the other one, what are they called, the defence, whatever they're called, can reject you. So I'm starting to walk, and the person representing the person who committed the crime went, rejection. And that was me, gone. Now, interestingly, when we're talking about judgment, there was quite a few of us. There was men in business suits. We got rejected. There were some people in jeans, bit of a tatty T-shirts. They were accepted. So can you see? It happens, doesn't it? It was a very interesting experience to do. I'm glad I sort of didn't get there when I found out what the case was, so I'm glad I was rejected on that one. But this is what it means when the Bible says that God is no respecter of persons. It simply means that with God there are no favourites. God shows no favouritism. Dr. Billy Graham puts it this way: God has no grandchildren. Think of those of us that got grandchildren. Grandchildren can get spoiled. They can get special treatment, can't they? Well, God has no grandchildren. James says that it's a problem when we treat one person this way in the church, another one a different way. Quite simply, he comes back to saying again and again, do not show favouritism. God's method of choosing has always been based on grace. We sang that earlier, didn't we? Not based on anything we are, or that we have, or ever will have. Grace is unmerited favour. God gives it freely to all who will receive it. The real test of whether faith is real is how we treat other people. And we are reminded here that we will be judged in at least 3 ways. Firstly, we will be judged by our words. All of us, doesn't matter who we are, have the potential to have a profound effect on those around us by what we have to say. We can literally change someone and their behaviour through words of encouragement. We were looking a little bit like this at the Bible study on Thursday in Hebrews and talking about encouraging one another. We find, don't we, it's very easy to offer words of discouragement or to pick fault. And I know when I was dental nursing and I was manager of a dental clinic, and I had to give critiques to the dental nurses and people underneath me, and I was taught in the critiquing process, you always start off with something positive, then in the middle you get to maybe the real nut of the issue, and then at the end you finish with something positive. Because what people will remember, not that you don't want them to remember that middle bit, because often that might mean that you need to pick your shoes up in this area or you need to do that. But people always remember the beginning part and they will remember that end. And so they will know what's been said in the middle, but the 2 sides which will help that person to grow and to move forward is those words of encouragement. So yes, we will be judged by our words. We will also be judged by our deeds. James tells us it is a sin to show favouritism. It is a sin to show favouritism. We will be judged by how much mercy we show towards others. So this is what I want you to do. And I'm not saying any of you do this here, but I want you to think about who you are closest to in this church family. It's probably someone that you always hang out with in fellowship, sit next to each week. That's fine. Now I want to ask yourself, how long has it been since you reached out to include perhaps somebody new into that circle? What are you doing in this church to make new people feel included? Just think about it. I'm not saying it's not being done, but it is easy, isn't it, always to gravitate towards the same people or to gravitate and sit in our groups. We do it. It's natural. But, maybe we can see that there's somebody else that might like to come in. It's just a thought, food for thought. So what should we do? First of all, we need to know ourselves and we need to know our own brokenness. We need to admit our own failures, to acknowledge that all you have, we owe to God. We need to genuinely develop our own humility and to understand that we are no better or worse than anyone else. We need to know Jesus. Pretty self-explanatory, but there is an active knowing. Be more aware, call each other out, recognise discrimination, recognise favouritism. WWJD. It's quite old now, but what would Jesus do? If there is something we do as a core, as a church, that contributes in any way to favouritism or discrimination, if we see it, let's call it out, like James did. Let's call it for what it is. And finally, proactively treat people with honour and respect, regardless of their appearance, their smell, their sound, their touch, the way they dress, anything. Perhaps even those that it might be hard to do so too. I want to share with you a little story that I read earlier. And I believe, this is in one of my devotion books, and I believe this sums up everything James has drawn our attention to today. So let me share this story. This story is about a young college student named Bill. Bill had wild hair, spiked with vivid colours. Picture? Bill always wore a t-shirt with holes in it, blue jeans, and usually was barefoot. He was actually a brilliant young man and had become a Christian while attending college. He attended a Christian organisation on campus, but he also wanted to find a church. Across the street from his college was a conservative, very traditional church. Everyone dressed up, lots of suits and nice dresses. One Sunday, Bill decided to visit the church. He walked into the sanctuary with no shoes, jeans, and a t-shirt and wild hair. The service had already started, so Bill walked down the aisle looking for a seat. But the church was packed and he could not find a seat anywhere. By now, people were uncomfortable, but no one said anything. Bill got closer to the front of the church. Isn't it typical? Where's the empty seats? Front of the church. When he realised there were no seats left, knowing what else to do, he just sat down in the aisle. Now, this was perfectly acceptable behaviour at his college Bible study, but this is one church where this had never happened before. You could feel the tension everywhere. The preacher didn't know what to do, so he just stood there for a moment in silence. About that time, an elderly man, one of the oldest members of that church, known by everyone, slowly made his way down the aisle towards Bill. The man was in his 80s. He wore a three-piece suit. He was very dignified, very traditional, and very conservative. As he started walking towards the boy, everyone was saying to themselves, You can't blame him for what he's going to do. How can you expect a man of his age and of his background to understand some college kid with not dressed right for church and sitting on the church floor? The old man walked with a cane, so it took a long time for him to reach the boy. The church was utterly silent, except for the click, click, clicking of the old man's cane. All eyes were focused on him. Finally, the old man reached the boy. He paused for a moment, then dropped his cane on the floor. With great difficulty, the old man lowered himself and sat down next to the boy. He shook the boy's hand and welcomed him to the church. When the minister gained control of himself, he said, "What I'm about to preach, you will probably never remember, but what you have just seen, you will never forget. Your life is the best sermon that can ever be preached." Christians should avoid forming cliques. God sees no difference between the social elite and the lowest class. All are called to serve and worship side by side. So today, my challenge is for us all, not just necessarily in the church, but wherever we go. May we each today be challenged on what is our life story, preaching to others who watch us. What are others seeing when they look at us? It's a challenge for us all, isn't it? We all have those days, I guess, where we do something where we know would not be making God happy. But if we just remember that today, that our lives, what we do is the best sermon that we can preach. We're going to sing a song that says, "I give you my heart." And as we sing this, the place of prayer is always open. And I trust this morning that if God has placed anything on your heart, it might be nothing to do with the sermon. Maybe you just need prayer for something else. This place is there for you to come and get prayer. There might be someone that you want to pray for. Remember, this is a place of grace. Just allow the Holy Spirit to minister to you. Lord, I give you my heart. I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Thank you.